Gabe Lipton is a writer and editor for Signal, and he joins us now. So, Gabe, what would you say is the big takeaway, the big headline, Gabe, from this?
So from the North-South Korea summit, I mean, I think we see Kim clearly positioning himself as opening to the South, wanting to get concessions on economic issues, making some sort of bland statements about denuclearization. But as the previous segment just mentioned, that we've seen this before, right? I mean, we've seen Western inspectors coming into the North, not given access to the nuclear sites, not being able to verify whether North Korea is ready to denuclearize. So the question for me, and I think for most observers, is whether North Korea is really willing to take the steps that Kim has suggested he might.
What does Kim Jong-un ultimately want?
I think that's the million-dollar question, right? Is what is his objective long term? I mean, I think you could imagine a world in which he starts to make North Korea look more like China, a state capitalist system driven really from the top to the bottom with strong party control. But the question for him is that really isn't that really a system that can be stable? Would you have different factions within North Korea vying for control? As people's living standards increase, would they want more things? Would they want more openness? Would they want more access to things that they see in the West? Once they see that they really have been not living as their regime has told them, being the best country in the world, do they want more? Do they want do they want democracy? Do they want other things?
You mentioned China. President Trump actually praised China for their role in all of this. What has been their role, and what have they been doing? So, I mean,
from China's perspective, what they want overall is stability, right? They see Kim's nuclear tests over the last few years as destabilizing. So they want, from the North Korean side, no more nuclear tests. That's a big win for them. But they don't want regime change, right? They don't want a flock of refugees coming north to China. They don't want South Korea. They don't want reunification that would see South Korea now boarding China in the north and U.S. troops perhaps on their doorstep. So for China, what they're really doing here is showing a preference for stability. They are clearly trying to establish a line with Kim Jong-un so he doesn't get over his skis a bit in negotiating with the North. And I think the rhetoric we see from Trump is, in some sense, he's always been favorable to Xi Jinping, at least in style, if not in substance. And he's trying to bring them to the table for any eventual negotiation that does occur.
President Trump's made it clear he wants to meet with Kim Jong-un very soon, in the near future, in the coming weeks. He has also mentioned denuclearization is his big focus. Is that realistic? Because ultimately part of getting this meeting is largely because he's in some way, well, people might not acknowledge it, being rewarded for having these nukes.
The biggest risk about this whole thing is the expectations gap between the North and between America. From Kim Jong-un's perspective, he comes to this meeting thinking he's the ultimate victor. He's shown that his country is a nuclear power. He's brought the West to the table. He has shown his people that his country is strong and is to be feared. On the other side of the equation, we have a Donald Trump who thinks that he has forced the North to capitulate, who's going to strike a grand bargain that no one else was capable of accomplishing. And at some point, they're going to realize that they both those two things can't be reconciled. So I think there's a very, very tangible risk here that once the two sides start negotiating, if they do end up meeting, that the sort of when it comes down to it, but neither is really willing to give on their red lines. For the North, denuclearization; for the West and for Donald Trump, for Donald Trump, them getting rid of their nukes.
You know, the president has railed against the Iran nuclear deal, and he said it was a bad deal. How does the president protect himself? So the way he views his personal opinion that the Iran nuclear deal was bad, how does he make sure that he doesn't get played with North Korea?
So for the North's perspective, I mean, the whole rhetoric around the Iran deal is dangerous because you see this deal struck by the West, by the U.S. Driving it, and you see a Donald Trump who has said, we're not going to stay at the table. Now, if you're Kim Jong-un, why would you make a deal when you see a similar negotiation and deal in Iran go bottom up? Right? There is a credibility problem that Donald Trump will ultimately face if he is to get rid of the Iran deal and to try to strike a deal on North Korea.
On North Korea, the president said that he is willing to walk away from the table. If that happens, what do you think it means?
There is a danger here. I mean, we saw with H.R. McMaster, the previous national security advisor, the contemplation of so-called bloody nose strike. The idea was to do preemptory strikes that would take out the North Korean nuclear capability. I do think there is a risk, although not a heightened risk, that you would see the contemplation of similar strikes in the future if these negotiations were to break down. I think with a more sort of hawkish group of advisors around the president, that could be up again. But I also think there's a danger from the Allies' perspective, that if South Korea perceives the U.S. as being responsible for the breakdown, being responsible for this thaw in relations, that you see the Allies sort of start to break apart from another, right? The South Koreans are very happy about these negotiations for many reasons, but because they have the most at risk. They're at the direct target of North Korean nuclear weapons, so you could see more divides between South Korea, Japan, and the U.S.
Negotiations, in part, it requires some concessions on both sides. What do you think the U.S. could provide to North Korea that they could want and would make a difference?
I think the U.S. is ready to give, perhaps on things like sanctions relief, other economic means that would allow Kim, who has actually stated just a few weeks ago that his new objective is securing the economic future of his people. Now, if that's his goal, the U.S. can accomplish that with his allies in giving them concessions on sanctions and other things that could allow the North to take care of its people. Where it isn't ready to give is on things like the U.S. military presence in South Korea, the existence of the THAAD anti-ballistic missile system in South Korea, these sort of the landmines across the DMZ, these sort of important security issues, I think we'll continue to see as being a red line for the West unless the North is ready to give on substantive things like its nuclear weapons program.
We also know today President Trump is meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. I don't expect French kisses to be passed on the cheek the way it was. I don't expect warm embraces.
Yes.
But what do you think ultimately? What are you watching for?
So when Donald Trump during the campaign famously said that if Hillary Clinton would be the Angela Merkel of the U.S., that was not a compliment, right? These two leaders don't have a very warm relationship. This is nothing like what we saw earlier in the week between President Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron.
Why doesn't he like her? Why? I mean, because this woman has, just politics aside, she has dealt with Putin. She's been in office for years now at this point. She got reelected. She got this party coalition together. So why does he kind of, it seems from outsiders that there's not a good flow between the two of them. Why?
I mean, rhetorically, we can understand, right? I mean, this is a woman from East Germany. She sort of comes in sort of the post-Cold War era. She embodies all these principles like multilateralism and democracy and cooperation that Donald Trump came into office completely spurning. So she is sort of the antithesis on substance of Donald Trump. But in terms of just style, too, I mean, she doesn't have sort of the flair and the energy of Emmanuel Macron. She's not a Xi Jinping, you know, sort of well-dressed, necessary, you know, sort of finely tuned hair and everything. So, but I think when during this week, what we're going to see is Angela Merkel pushing on the major issues that Macron brought up: steel exemptions, NATO spending, and security issues, and the Iran deal as well. And the question is whether Donald Trump is really willing to make concessions on these issues.
All right, Gabe Lipton, thank you so much for joining us, Gabe.
Great to be with you.